New Zealand passed the Prostitution Reform Act in 2003, which decriminalised sex work.
Freedom for the right to work, freedom to be protected by the law, freedom from abuse and violence, freedom from discrimination, freedom from stigma, freedom to move and migrate, freedom to quality health care, freedom to make my own money, freedom to be a union, freedom to be a sex worker.
Before the law changed, the police would sometimes pose as clients and come in and, into the massage parlours where sex workers worked, or they'd come and see us on the street and they'd open our bags and see our condoms. They'd take the condoms away, they'd line them up, they'd take photographs of them, even if they were used, and put them into their body of evidence to establish that prostitution had occurred.
When I first started working, I was 18. In my early 20s, I had my son. I was a single parent. I had to support myself. I had a babysitter at night to look after him while I worked at nights. A lot of times I'd be too scared in the room. I always felt that maybe it was a police officer, so it was incredibly hard asking if they wanted any extras. So I found a lot of times you'd just do a massage, a straight massage, which you wouldn't get paid for because you were too scared to ask for extras. A lot of times I remember feeling so scared I'd actually say no because I was just so paranoid and so scared. And then I remember sort of having to sort of hide the condoms somewhere, and you'd sort of get them out once you'd sort of agreed for what service they wanted. And that was that horrible feeling, sort of getting out that condom and sort of ripping it open. You were just so incredibly paranoid. Just talking about it now, I feel my heart's palpitating in my chest and I feel like throwing up. I've got butterflies just even thinking about going back to those days. It's just horrific. I wouldn't wish that upon anybody.
We used to get arrested, go down, get charged, get a record for it. But in the process, while you're going through all of that, you're losing out on your opportunity to get your bread and butter. I mean, you could spend probably maybe 2, 3, sometimes even all night just to wait to get processed.
Before decriminalisation, sex workers had to duck and hide. You couldn't tell people what you were doing. It was very difficult to have things like condoms. You couldn't, everyone worried about carrying condoms. Everyone worried about having condoms at work. Even basic information about sex work and sharing ideas was problematic for some people.
I do remember when new girls would start, you'd always feel paranoid that she was an undercover policewoman, because a lot of times the workers that were already there, if you'd been in a certain place for a while, you'd sort of have like a little family and you all trusted each other, and you'd always be quite scared if a new girl came and she was, I guess, maybe standoffish. You'd always wonder whether she was an undercover police officer.
The New Zealand Prostitutes Collective was set up by sex workers to advocate for our rights, health and well-being in 1987. The government contracted with our organisation, the New Zealand Prostitutes Collective. We decided what needed to be in that contract and negotiated with the government. We told them we needed to be able to run our own HIV prevention programs.
NZPC had been looking at changing the law for some time. Sex workers were involved at all levels, so they were being asked when they came in, how do you think we should change this? What do you think we should do about this? This is what's happening at the moment, how do you think we can do better than that? So they were involved at all stages. Even when it went to lawyers to help draft it into legal language, sex workers were still being involved at that level.
I think it was very difficult for people working. If you're a sex worker and working illegally, your options were quite limited. A lot of sex workers had to work behind a facade, so massage parlours, escort agencies created a kind of distance between them and the law. It was a flimsy facade at times. If the police chose to enforce the law, they could come in and arrest people for brothel keeping, for living on the earnings, or for soliciting, and they did often.
The process of changing the law.
The Prostitution Reform Bill was introduced into Parliament by Tim Barnett in September 2000. It was drawn from the private member's ballot a month later, and submissions were called for because it was then sent to the Electoral Select Committee.
So public health organisations supported the law, women's organisations supported on the basis of human rights.
Recognition that sex work is labour and not a criminal activity allows public policy to focus upon human rights, health and safety issues, and fair working conditions within the industry. Human Rights Commission.
We had unions who said, look, of course, people need to be able to negotiate for their own safety, for their own occupational health.
Decriminalising prostitution will allow sex workers to have the same rights as workers involved in other industries. This will improve their working conditions and encourage them to attain quality health care. Māori Women's Welfare League.
We even had different parts of the police saying, well, of course it's important. If we're chasing people, we're not going to be able to solve crimes. If we can work with them in a collaborative way, it makes more sense to us. So a whole range of different kinds of organisations said it was very important to support decriminalisation.
There were over 200 submissions received from the public, a lot of them from people who were opposed to the bill, who put in very similar submissions. Those who were in favour of the bill put in very good, high-quality submissions that the Select Committee itself found very convincing.
We joined with organisations like the YWCA, the National Council on Women, the Business and Professional Women's Federation. We said, we're just like you. We are people too. We are sex workers, we are people too, we are workers. And we want the same rights as any other worker.
After the written submission process, there was the oral submission process. And this was probably more important than the written submission process because the Select Committee got to speak to sex workers often for the first time. And for many people in Parliament, it was the first time that sex workers were openly identifying as sex workers in front of a parliamentary Select Committee.
The New Zealand Prostitutes Collective and other coalition partners chose Member of Parliament Tim Barnett to sponsor the bill in its passage through Parliament.
Tim Barnett's phone calls these days are all about sex. Barnett knows around 10 MPs still don't know how they'll vote, and he's determined to win them over.
I think it's about completing the replacement of old-fashioned, irrelevant law that tries to moralise with legislation that's actually relevant to people.
The lobbyists have been hanging around Parliament all day.
It is very crucial. I don't think the debate will come around again, for a number of years. And there is a lot that weighs on this.
I'm nervous that a basic civil right might be denied a stigmatised minority that's already working under very risky circumstances.
Those who vote for accept that we can do better than the current messy law and that this bill is a workable improvement.
MPs today received letters from Tim Barnett urging them to vote for it and urging those supportive of it to change other MPs' minds. The margin will be narrow whichever way it goes. The last vote saw it pass with a 2-vote majority, but some MPs have decided to switch their votes at the last minute.
Are you confident it'll get passed, or are you a bit concerned now?
I haven't felt like this since I stood in a courtroom with a woman who was facing soliciting charges, and that was fairly touch and go.
Just over 2 hours, MPs will begin the final controversial vote on whether to give legal protection to prostitutes. And both sides of the decriminalisation debate predict a narrow victory. Political reporter Garth Bray explains.
Tim Barnett gets his last chance to sway the doubters.
Will 61 of us vote to remove the last significant vestige of Victorian moral law from the New Zealand statute book? Yes, Mr. Speaker, I believe we will.
The ayes are 60, the noes are 59, abstention 1. The bill will be read a third time. Unlock the door.
Unlock the door! It doesn't get any closer, but all it takes is one vote more than your opponents to change the rules.
At the start of today, I knew that we had between sort of 58 and 63. And I told it...
Some of the credit went to Georgina Byers' impassioned speech.
But please, I beg of you,
The former sex worker's harrowing tale of a knife-point encounter silenced a packed public gallery.
it would have been nice to have known that instead of having to deal out the justice myself afterwards to that person, I may have been able to approach the authorities, the police in this case, and say, I was raped! And yes, I'm a prostitute, and no, it was not right that I should have been raped because I said no.
Good evening, welcome to Late Edition. The world's oldest profession is now legal in New Zealand, but the move to decriminalise prostitution squeezed in by only one vote, and it was passed after a handful of MPs changed their minds.
Well, I remembered when I first came into Parliament, I stated I had a permanent interest for marginalised groups, women, Maori, Pacific, all those who struggled to live a life of dignity.
This is a conscience issue, and I respect every MP who exercised their conscience last night.
Catherine, the tangible difference as far as you're concerned that's going to make to the industry?
I think it's going to make a huge difference for the way people feel, to be marked as a criminal, to be documented, to be registered by the police and monitored as a criminal actually stands in the way of many crimes being addressed. And this is going to make a huge difference.
How hard did you work to twist arms on this?
We continued to promote the bill, talking about the principles behind the bill. We linked these to practices, inconsistencies that we've dealt with over time. We've had a lot of support from the community, from different agencies.
Can you swing a politician?
I don't believe so. I think they, certainly they have their own opinions. They're influenced by a number of people and a number of issues, and I think politics comes into play as well.
I feel quite extraordinary at the moment, and I have to say that we have created what I regard as world-leading law. It's about time New Zealand did that again, and I'm very proud that we're doing it on such an important issue.
When the law changed itself, I remember the night itself. I was out on the streets with my colleagues. So, of course, I'm always going to remember the night when we got changed because it lifted off a lot of all our shoulders. It's hard enough that we're out there selling ourselves, but, to know that we're allowed to do it legally, that made it even so much better for us.
The Prostitution Reform Act, 2003. The purpose of this Act is to decriminalise prostitution and to create a framework that A. safeguards the workers and protects them from exploitation, B. promotes the welfare and occupational safety and health of sex workers, C. is conducive to public health, and D. prohibits the use of prostitution of persons under 18 years of age.
After the law changed, it meant that sex workers had a lot more power, real power.
Now, since the law has changed, myself personally, people are more laid back and quite happy, and they just go, oh yes, okay, and sort of, yeah. So I've definitely noticed that has changed, actually.
Why does it work? Well, it's just, for me, I'm just providing a service. And the service I provide, I'm getting money for it. And so, yeah, I would consider it sales and service sort of work.
It has what other jobs have. It has tools of the trade. There are risks involved.
Decriminalisation addresses the power imbalance, allowing sex workers to enter into negotiations with employers over a range of issues, including wages, workplace conditions, and the terms on which they engage in sex. Human Rights Commission.
I've been doing outreach to our sex working community for 10 years. The sex workers have more rights under the law to report incidents of crime and violence.
If I had a problem with a new client, I wouldn't hesitate in contacting the police.
There was a sense that the Prostitution Reform Act meant incidents of violence against sex workers would now be taken seriously. Crime and Justice Research Centre.
I've been sort of working with the New Zealand Police Force because they created a division in their departments called the Diversity Liaison Officers. And part of my role as an outreach worker is to educate them about transgendered women. I like it because it gives them, the police, more of an opportunity or sort of an insight of the streets as opposed to reading it or seeing it. At least they're hearing it from experience, so it's good in that sense.
We don't have to worry anymore about any legal issues coming up when we freely discuss sex and our services that we provide. It is not illegal to talk about sex within this building or within anywhere else because of the decriminalisation, and that's a very good thing. So if a client were to come back here and talk about something they may want to do or some fantasy they have that they haven't disclosed to the receptionist or to you out in the lounge, and suddenly they're in here and say, oh, do you want to try that or something? And if you don't feel comfortable, you're within your rights to say no. And if they insist, you're within your rights to stop the booking.
The committee concludes that the Prostitution Reform Act has had a marked effect in safeguarding the rights of sex workers to refuse particular clients and practices, chiefly by empowering sex workers through removing the illegality of their work. Prostitution Law Review Committee.
Sex workers can work either in a brothel, in a managed brothel. They can work for themselves with friends. They can set up apartments together. They can work from home. They can also work from the street. So there are many more options. So you don't have one sector of the industry which is more dominant.
I'm working privately at the moment, so it's quite nice being able to sort of pick and choose who you see when you take phone calls. I do have a lot of regular clientele, and I find it's fantastic. I enjoy it.
Hi Joy.
Hi Rowan, have a seat. Thank you. How are you?
And you can come and talk to them about any of your sexual health worries if you need to. You're not made to have a checkup. Checkups are voluntary and you decide when you have them.
I am consistently impressed by the knowledge and peer support within the industry. Suggestions that sex workers will be irresponsible in regard to their or others' health is not borne out by my clinical experience. Sexual Health Clinic Nurse.
It's your body, so you decide when you want to go through that. Since the law has changed, I found it's a lot easier for men to sort of wear condoms now, although I have found still, and I don't think it will ever change, there's a certain sort of age group of men. It's a lot of the middle-aged to older men that still ask about sort of oral without a condom. So obviously sort of some of the messages aren't getting through, and I always just say to them, look, I'm a sex worker. I mean, I practice safe sex, but it still surprises me, sort of mentality. So I give them a rundown on sort of sexually transmitted diseases that can be given to you sort of through practicing unsafe sex.
If probably 2 or 3 stories that a street-based sex worker told me. In a decriminalised state, she rang up 111 and got the operator and said, this client has refused to pay me. Turned up on the streets and they marched the client to the ATM machine and said, you have to pay her money. Another story I've heard is a worker, she had a difficult client who refused to pay her and she rang 111. The police officer said on the other line, put me on speakerphone, and he said to the client, if you don't give her her money or drop her off where you picked her up from, we're going to charge you with extortion. And the police officer said, the sex worker has given me your licence plate number and drop her off now and give back her money. So these are the sorts of things that happen now under a decriminalised country.
If you come across a violent client or if you have any problems with anyone within the building, they're removed at once, or you think you're not going to be safe with them back in the room, you can refuse to see them.
We have a drop-in centre, and through our outreach programs, when we come across new sex workers, we talk to them about, do they know, how things work on the job? Do they know how to use condoms and lube? And we talk about the law under the Prostitution Reform Act in a decriminalised country, and then we also discuss about how to keep safe on the job.
The advice I would give to new workers is always use protection. If you get into trouble, call the police. Always be alert and of the activity around you. If you're going anywhere, let somebody know. And if your friend is going with a client, always take down the number plate. Telephones are very important, mobile phones, and always work in pairs. That's the safest way to work if you're on the street and you're not feeling, and you don't feel, if the situation is getting a little bit heated with drunk people, stay in pairs, watch each other, walk away. Decriminalise sex work is of great help to sex workers. It means that they're no longer looking over their shoulders and thinking, the police coming today. They're no longer having to hide condoms. They're no longer having to worry about search warrants being served on them for where condoms can be seized and used as evidence against them.
For me personally now, that the laws have been decriminalised, I have a lot more pride in being a worker, because when I was legal, you had no rights. But now I sort of got a lot more rights as a worker, which is very empowering in a way that I know that I have the rights to work or not work. And should I work, I know that I have the rights as every other person who's employed as well. So it's made it a lot easier in that sense for me.
It helps to ensure that they have the same rights as other people in employment, in criminal law, in civil law.
So I work in a small owner-operated brothel. I'm very much out as a sex worker, which is something that I feel actually really privileged to be able to do, because I think that being in a decriminalised environment, and I don't know, I think other factors to do with this, the social circle I'm part of and things like that have meant that it's been reasonably easy for me to be out. And it's really important for me to be out, I think, for 2 reasons. So the first reason I came out was because I just found it extremely isolating, having to, keep a really important and often quite exciting part of my life secret. And also just tiring. I mean, having to sort of pretend to be doing another job or pretending to not be doing anything, it was just sort of, I found that really stressful. So that was a really practical reason that I wanted to be out. I don't think that anybody is at all obliged to be out, and I 100% respect everybody, every individual sex worker's right to manage information about their profession and be as private as they want to be. But I think that some of us being out has a pretty important role to play in challenging people's perceptions of sex work and of who sex workers are.
Under decriminalisation, sex workers are not required to register our names with an authority, which means we can maintain our privacy. This measure protects us from discrimination, which is important for our safety, health and well-being. New Zealand Prostitutes Collective, 2013.
Whenever I'm sort of confronted with people who have problems with sex workers, I sort of think to myself, something that Dr. Zeus once sort of said, you know, those who mind don't matter. That's it. And those who matter don't mind. So, there you are. That's my philosophy.
Sex workers, like anybody else, should be afforded the same human rights as everybody else everywhere. The right to work safely and the right to work in the jobs they want to do. They should be allowed to make the choice for themselves without other people telling them they're criminals.
The freedom of decriminalisation, especially for sex workers in New Zealand, is long overdue, in my opinion. And it's done so well in New Zealand. It's brought a lot of sort of in the closet sex workers out, who you know, there's no shame in being a sex worker at all. There's no shame in the game, as they say.
All around the world, sex workers are calling for the decriminalisation of sex work.
Sex work is work. It's not what the person is, because it's what the person does for a living. So it is work. I could have been a farm worker or an au pair or a domestic worker, but then I chose to do sex work because it's something that would have given me more money than what I would have earned as a farm worker. So it is still a choice, but under the limited choices that one would have had. Under the criminalized system, anyone can do anything to a sex worker. The clients of sex workers, the society, the police themselves, and even the service providers, which is the healthcare service providers, the justice system, they can do anything to sex workers because they currently do know that sex workers have no one to turn to. But then if it was decriminalized, everyone would know that if I do something to a sex worker, the sex worker has grounds to go to the justice system, to the Department of Health. They've got someone to turn to, and it will be recognized. I might be named and shamed and being taken to court. But currently, because they know that sex workers' hands are tied, so people can just do about anything to sex workers.
Sex workers are a part of society, not apart from society, and it's important that they have access to all kinds of services, all kinds of organisations, without fearing that their health and safety and their general well-being and parts of their life are going to be disrupted, and you know, that they can actually go about their business, about their life, about their work in the same way that anyone else can.